In the darkness of December 13, 1941, four Allied destroyers armed with radar ambushed two Italian cruisers carrying desperately needed aviation fuel to Rommel's Afrika Corps and destroyed them in just 5 minutes. The Battle of Cape Bon stands as one of the most lopsided naval victories of World War II. Over 900 Italian sailors killed against just 2 Allied wounded. This engagement demonstrated how technology, intelligence, and tactical brilliance could utterly neutralize a numerically superior force. By December 1941, the Italian supply line to North Africa was hemorrhaging. British Force K, operating from Malta, had turned the Mediterranean into a killing ground. In November alone, 70% of supplies sent to Libya were lost, with a staggering 92% of fuel shipments destroyed. Rommel's Afrika Corps was in crisis. By December 15th, the Germans could muster only 8 operational tanks, and the Luftwaffe's JG-27 fighter unit was down to just 6 serviceable Bf-109s across all 3 Gruppen. The aviation fuel situation was particularly desperate. Without it, Axis aircraft could not escort incoming supply convoys, creating a vicious cycle of destruction. A major convoy operation, designated M41, was scheduled for December 13th, but required air cover from Libya-based aircraft that had almost no fuel to burn. Italian Naval Command, Supermarina, devised a desperate solution. Used their fastest warships, the light cruisers Alberico de Barbiano and Alberto di Giussano, as high-speed transports. Capable of 42 knots on trials, these ships could theoretically outrun any interdiction. They would carry approximately 2,000 tons of cargo, including 100 tons of aviation fuel, 250 tons of gasoline, 600 tons of naphtha, and 900 tons of food, plus 135 naval ratings on passage to Tripoli. There was a critical flaw in this plan. The fuel was stored in unsealed barrels packed so densely on the stern decks that the aft gun turrets could not even traverse. These cruisers, already dangerously under-armored with belt protection of just 24 millimeters, less than 1 inch, had been transformed into floating bombs. Unknown to the Italians, their communications were completely compromised. British codebreakers at Bletchley Park had cracked the Italian Navy's C-38 Hagelin cipher machine, and by December 1941, decryption was so efficient that decoded intelligence reached British commanders within just 7 hours of transmission. At the system's peak, Bletchley was processing 2,000 Italian Hagelin messages daily. By December 8th, British intelligence had decoded signals revealing the supply mission's exact route to Tripoli. When Rear Admiral Antonino Toscano's cruisers departed Palermo at 1810 on December 12th, the trap was already set. The British 4th Destroyer Flotilla, HMS Seek, HMS Maori, HMS Legion, and the Dutch destroyer HNLM's Isaac Sweers had departed Gibraltar bound for Alexandria. Now they received new orders: increase speed to 30 knots and intercept. To protect the ultra-secret, the RAF deliberately sent a Wellington bomber to discover the Italian ships, aircraft reconnaissance that would explain the interception without revealing the true source. Italian observers spotted both the reconnaissance aircraft and the British destroyers 60 miles off Algiers that afternoon. Supermarina calculated the British ships, even at 28 knots, wouldn't reach Cape Bon until 3 a.m., approximately 1 hour after the Italian cruisers would pass. This calculation contained 2 fatal errors. The British were making 30 knots, not 28, and Toscano's ships had fallen behind schedule by an hour, a delay he failed to report. The 4 Allied destroyers approaching Cape Bon represented a formidable striking force. HMS Seek and HMS Maori were tribal-class destroyers, displacing 2,519 tons fully loaded, armed with 8 4.7-inch guns and a quadruple torpedo mount. HMS Legion was an L-class destroyer carrying twice the torpedo armament, 8 21-inch tubes in 2 quadruple mounts. LMFM Isaac Sweers, completed in Britain after escaping the German invasion of the Netherlands, was the fastest of the group at 37.5 knots, and notably carried the revolutionary Hasemeyer fire control system for her 40mm Bofors guns. Most critically, All four destroyers were equipped with Type 286 surface search radar, capable of detecting cruisers at 6 to 8 miles in complete darkness. The Italians had no equivalent. They were blind in the night. Commander Graham Henry Stokes, commanding the 4th Destroyer Flotilla from Seek, had combat experience from the hunt for Bismarck and understood the tactical possibilities. The night of December 12th to 13th was ideal for ambush. The moon was a waning crescent at just 15% illumination, visibility was poor, and the dark Tunisian coastline would provide perfect concealment. The Italian force consisted of the 2 Condottieri-class cruisers, escorted only by the torpedo boat Cigno. Originally, a 3rd cruiser, Giovanni delle Bandinere, and another torpedo boat, Climene, were to participate. But mechanical breakdowns left Toscano with a dangerously thin escort. His cruisers, designed as destroyer hunters to counter French ships, displaced 6,570 tons fully loaded and mounted 8 152mm guns. But their paper-thin armor made them vulnerable to torpedoes, and their guns were partly blocked by cargo. At 22:23 on December 12th, Toscano received a warning that he might encounter enemy steamers coming from Malta. At 23:15, he ordered action stations. The Italian cruisers were making approximately 22 to 23 knots to conserve fuel for delivery, steaming in line ahead with Cigno following astern. At 2:30 on December 13th, Stokes's radar detected the Italian cruisers approximately 7 miles off Cape Bon. He immediately implemented a textbook interception maneuver. I immediately reduced the speed of the force under my command in order to avoid showing a big phosphorescent bow wave, Stokes later reported, and led inshore so as to get between the enemy and the land. By positioning his destroyers against the dark coastline, he rendered them invisible to Italian lookouts, while silhouetting the cruisers against the open sea. At 2:45, the Italians heard the British Wellington reconnaissance aircraft overhead, but believed this was routine surveillance. They had no idea that 4 destroyers were closing from astern at high speed. At 3:15, the Italian ships altered course to 157 degrees to pass approximately 1 mile off Cape Bon. Then, at 3:20, Admiral Toscano made a fateful decision that remains controversial to this day. He suddenly ordered full speed and a course change to 337 degrees, effectively reversing direction. His reasons are unknown. He may have spotted something, feared air attack, or planned to abort the mission as he had on December 9th. Neither Cigno nor Giussano received the order properly, throwing the formation into confusion. This decision inadvertently accelerated the Allied approach from astern. The trap was sprung. At 3:22, Commander Stokes gave the order to attack. HMS Seek and HMS Legion fired torpedoes and opened with their guns at the lead cruiser, Alberico de Barbiano, from a range of barely 1,000 meters, point blank, for naval combat. The effect was devastating. Seek's torpedoes struck de Barbiano below the forward turret and in the engine room. The ship burst into flames immediately. The hundreds of fuel barrels on deck had ignited, transforming the cruiser into an inferno. Italian machine guns fired briefly, but the main batteries never got a shot off. HMS Mauri and HNLMS Isaac Swears engaged Alberto di Giussano. The second cruiser managed only 3 salvos, which exploded harmlessly on the Cape Bon foreshore, before she too was hit by torpedoes and silenced by concentrated gunfire. Commander Rafe Edward Courage of Mauri reported, "After your torpedoes had damaged the leading cruiser, Mauri opened fire with gunfire, and a large number of hits were observed on the bridge of the enemy. When she was abeam, Mauri fired 2 torpedoes, one of which was seen to hit. This cruiser passed astern in flames and was undoubtedly sinking. By 03:27, the engagement was essentially over. Both Italian cruisers were burning wrecks, dead in the water. At 3:35, just 13 minutes after the first torpedo struck, Alberico de Barbiano capsized and sank in a sea of flame. Admiral Toscano, Captain Giorgio Rodocanacchi, and 534 men went down with her. Alberto di Giussano lingered longer, her crew desperately fighting fires and abandoning ship. At 4:20, she broke in two and sank, taking another 283 sailors to their deaths. The torpedo boat Cygno briefly exchanged fire with Isaac Swears, taking damage but managing to escape. She would later rescue approximately 500 survivors from the burning waters. The contrast in casualties was staggering. The Italians lost between 817 and 900-plus men killed. Sources vary on the exact total, plus both cruisers and their entire cargo. The Allies suffered exactly 2 men wounded aboard HMS Maori from shell splinters and no ship damage whatsoever. Amid the catastrophe, individual acts of heroism emerged. Captain Giorgio Rodocanacchi of de Barbiano, when his ship was sinking, organized the crew's evacuation and then gave his own life preserver to a sailor who lacked one. He was last seen going down with his ship and was posthumously awarded Italy's Gold Medal of Military Valor. Approximately 700 to 800 Italian survivors were eventually rescued through the combined efforts of Cygno, Italian MAS motor torpedo boats, and possibly Vichy French vessels and Tunisian fishermen. Commander Stokes summed up the action with characteristic understatement. The maneuver was successful, beyond my wildest expectations. The Battle of Cape Bon was fundamentally a technology mismatch. The British possessed 2 decisive advantages that the Italians simply could not counter. Radar gave the Allied destroyers eyes in the darkness. The Type 286 sets could detect cruiser-sized targets at 6 to 8 miles, allowing Stokes to track, approach, and attack without ever being seen. The Italians, lacking any shipborne radar, were completely blind. They never knew the destroyers were there until torpedoes exploded against their hulls. Ultra-intelligence ensured the British were waiting in exactly the right place at the right time. The C-38 cipher break meant Italian operational plans were known to the British almost as soon as Italian commanders received them. This allowed the 4th Destroyer Flotilla to be vectored onto an interception course with minimal guesswork. The Italians compounded their technological disadvantages through tactical errors. The fuel barrels blocking gun arcs meant even undamaged turrets couldn't engage targets astern, exactly where the attack came from. Admiral Toscano's last-minute course reversal disrupted his formation. And the chronic Italian weakness in night fighting, exposed so brutally at Cape Matapan 9 months earlier, remained unaddressed. The loss of da Barbiano and di Giussano had immediate operational consequences. The 2,000 tons of cargo, especially the aviation fuel, never reached Libya. Without it, Axis aircraft could not effectively escort the M41 convoy. The fuel crisis deepened, coming just 4 days before the First Battle of Sirte and amid Operation Crusader. Cape Bon contributed to the supply catastrophe that forced Rommel to retreat to El Agheila by late December. The loss further reinforced Italian naval reluctance to commit surface forces at night, a psychological impact dating back to Cape Matapan. Naval historians consider Cape Bon one of the most lopsided destroyer victories of the war. Vincent P. O'Hara praised Commander Stokes's boldness in pursuing and engaging the enemy despite numerical inferiority in gunpowder, noting that radar was the decisive factor. The battle validated destroyer squadrons as effective weapons against unescorted cruisers and demonstrated that superior technology could completely neutralize advantages in size and firepower. The engagement is sometimes called a mini Matapan, a smaller-scale version of the March 1941 disaster, where 3 Italian heavy cruisers were sunk in a night action with similar one-sided results. The 4 Allied destroyers that fought at Cape Bon continued their Mediterranean service, but none survived the war. HMS Seek met a heroic end on September 14, 1942, during Operation Agreement, the Tobruk raid. Hit repeatedly by Italian coastal artillery, she fought until the end, B turret still firing as ship sank. 115 men died. Her memorial commemorates how she continued to fight although she was under direct fire of the shore batteries only a mile away. HMS Maori was sunk on February 12, 1942 by German air attack while in Malta's Grand Harbor. Only 1 crew member died. Her wreck, at 14 to 16 meters depth off Valletta, is now a popular dive site. HMS Legion was damaged at the Second Battle of Sirte and sunk on March 26, 1942, by German bombing while awaiting repair at Malta. LMS Isaac Swears continued heroic service, including rescuing 240 crew from the torpedoed HMS Gurkha before being torpedoed by U-431 on November 13, 1942. During Operation Torch, 108 of her 194 crew perished. The wreck of Alberico de Barbiano was located in 2007 by the Altair expedition at 60 to 70 meters depth, about 1 mile from the Tunisian coast, where she remains as a memorial to those December waters. Cape Bon encapsulates the Mediterranean naval war in miniature. Italian desperation, British technological superiority, and the decisive role of intelligence. In 5 minutes of chaos, fire, and torpedo explosions, 900 Italian sailors died so that 2 British sailors could suffer minor wounds. 2 cruisers were traded for 0 Allied damage. The battle demonstrated 3 lessons that would echo through naval warfare for decades. First, radar transformed night combat from a gamble into a predictable advantage for those who possessed it. Second, signals intelligence could negate speed, firepower, and numbers by ensuring the enemy walked into an ambush. Third, desperation, using warships as fuel transports with compromised armament, invites catastrophe. For documentary purposes, this engagement offers exceptional dramatic elements. The countdown of intelligence and interception, the irony of Toscano's fatal course reversal, the 5-minute annihilation, individual heroism amid disaster, and the stark asymmetry of the casualty figures. It is a story of technology, courage, tragedy, and the cold mathematics of modern naval warfare. Key times for December 13, 1941, local time were as follows. At 2:30, radar contact was made with Italian cruisers. At 2:45, Italians heard reconnaissance aircraft. At 3:15, Italians altered course toward Cape Bon. At 3:20, Toscano ordered the fatal course reversal. At 3:22, the first torpedo struck da Barbiano. At 3:27, both cruisers were disabled. At 3:35, da Barbiano capsized and sank. And at 4:20, da Giussano broke in two and sank. Ship specifications were as follows. HMS Seek was a tribal-class destroyer displacing 2,519 tons with a speed of 36 knots and main armament of 8 4.7-inch guns and 4 torpedoes. HMS Maori was a tribal-class destroyer displacing 2,519 tons with a speed of 36 knots and main armament of 8 4.7-inch guns and 4 torpedoes. HMS Legion was an L-class destroyer displacing 2,660 tons with a speed of 36 knots and main armament of 8 4-inch guns and 8 torpedoes. HNLMS Isaac Swears was a Kallenberg-class destroyer displacing 2,228 tons with a speed of 37.5 knots and main armament of 6 4-inch guns and 8 torpedoes. Alberico de Barbiano was a condottieri-class cruiser displacing 6,570 tons with a speed of 37 knots and main armament of 8 152mm guns and 4 torpedoes. Alberto di Giussano was a condottieri-class cruiser displacing 6,570 tons with a speed of 37 knots and main armament of 8 152mm guns and 4 torpedoes. Key personnel on the Allied side included Commander G. H. Stokes, DSC, RN, who was the 4th Destroyer Flotilla Commander on HMS Seek, Commander R. E. Courage, RN, on HMS Maori, Commander R. F. Jessel, RN, on HMS Legion, and Commander Tautzmuller, NL, on HNLS Isaac Swears. On the Italian side, Ammiraglio di Divisione Antonino Toscano was the 4th Division commander and was killed in action. Capitano di Vascello, Giorgio Rodocanacchi, commanded da Barbiano and was killed in action, receiving a posthumous gold medal, and Capitano di Vascello Giovanni Marabotto commanded di Giussano and survived. The casualty summary showed Italian dead numbered between 817 and 900 plus, with 534 from da Barbiano and 283 from di Giussano. Italian survivors numbered approximately 700 to 800 who were rescued. Allied casualties were 2 wounded on HMS Maori. Allied ships lost were 0. Documentary quotes include Commander Stokes saying, "The maneuver was successful beyond my wildest expectations." Commander Courage reported, This cruiser passed astern in flames and was undoubtedly sinking. On the sinking, it was noted that, at 3:35, the Barbiano capsized and sank in a sea of flame.